There's a moment many overlook. A dog pausing mid-movement, body alert yet uncertain, pulled forward by instinct and held back by something quieter. The chase begins not with urgency, but with awareness. Eyes tracking, posture shifting, breath adjusting to a rhythm older than thought. To the observer, it may appear simple, even impulsive, but beneath the movement lives a complex emotional landscape shaped by biology, memory, and social learning. Dogs do not chase without context. What looks like pursuit is often a negotiation between curiosity and restraint, connection and regulation. It is a behavior that carries traces of attachment, arousal, confusion, and adaptation, all unfolding silently. In these moments, dogs reveal not recklessness, but responsiveness, to scent, to presence, to internal states they cannot name, yet carefully manage. Before the chase ever begins, there is a pause, a shift in posture, so subtle it can be missed if one is only watching for movement. The dog's body becomes attentive, but not explosive. Muscles engage without tightening. The head lifts slightly. The eyes track, not with urgency, but with focus. This is where behavior truly starts, not in running, but in noticing. Dogs communicate first through stillness, a change in breathing, a tail that lifts but does not wag, weight shifting forward, then settling back. These are not random signals. They are the language of assessment. The dog is reading scent carried on the air, movement patterns, distance, and timing. Long before action, there is interpretation. To an untrained eye, the chase seems sudden. One moment calm, the next in motion, but internally, the dog has already processed layers of information. The presence of another dog, particularly a female, activates instinctive awareness. Yet that awareness does not automatically translate into loss of control. What emerges instead is a quiet alertness, shaped by past experiences and emotional learning. The dog is not deciding in words. It is regulating in sensation. Ears rotate, not necessarily toward sound, but toward relevance. The eyes soften or sharpen depending on proximity. The body angle changes, positioning itself neither fully committed nor disengaged. This middle state is important. It reflects an internal negotiation between curiosity and restraint. Many mistake this phase as indecision. In reality, it is discernment. Dogs evolve to read before they act. Movement carries consequence in social environments. Approaching another dog, especially one charged with biological significance, requires emotional calibration. Too fast can mean conflict. Too slow can mean misconnection. The body learns to hover in awareness, waiting for clarity. This is why the earliest signals are quiet. There's often no sound, no pulling forward, no visible excitement, just presence that feels slightly heightened, as if the room has shifted temperature. The dog is not yet chasing. It is aligning itself emotionally with what is unfolding. Understanding this moment changes how the behavior is seen. The chase is no longer the start of the story. It is a continuation of one already in progress. And within that still beginning lies a truth often overlooked. Dogs are not driven only by instinct. They are guided by perception, memory, and an ongoing effort to stay regulated. Even when instinct calls loudly, every dog carries an emotional history that begins long before the moment of pursuit. Before instinct sharpens attention, before interest finds direction, there is memory, stored not as images, but as sensation, safety felt or withheld, presence given or inconsistent, calm that arrived reliably or only sometimes. Attachment in dogs is formed quietly. It develops through repetition rather than intention. A puppy learns the emotional rules of its world through patterns. Who returns, who disappears, what signals lead to comfort, and which ones fade unanswered. These early experiences do not teach behavior. They shape expectation. When a dog later becomes attuned to another dog, especially a female, it is not responding only to biology. It is responding through an attachment-filtered nervous system, one that has learned how closeness works. For some dogs, early emotional environments were stable. Contact was predictable. Separation was brief and followed by return. These dogs often approach social interests with measured curiosity. Their bodies remember that connection does not require urgency. For others, emotional availability was inconsistent. Attention came and went. Signals were sometimes met, sometimes ignored. In such cases, the nervous system adapts. It learns that proximity may be fleeting. That opportunity must be noticed quickly. That waiting too long can mean loss. This does not create anxiety in a dramatic sense. It creates sensitivity. The dog becomes skilled at reading moments. It tracks movement closely. It responds to shifts in distance with heightened awareness. The chase, when it happens, carries emotional weight shaped by earlier learning, an urge to close space before it disappears. Importantly, this is not desperation. It is adaptation. Dogs do not analyze their past, but their bodies remember emotional patterns. When a female dog moves away, the response that follows may echo an early lesson. Connection must be maintained through motion. Stillness once led to absence. Attachment patterns are not fixed behaviors. They are emotional tendencies, quiet leanings toward approach or restraint, toward waiting or following, toward observing from distance or closing space. Understanding this layer reframes the behavior entirely. The chase is no longer a standalone act. It is a surface expression of a long-developed internal rhythm, shaped by early emotional learning. The dog is not seeking dominance, not seeking conquest. It is responding in the only language its nervous system learned early on. Proximity feels meaningful, and movement feels like participation. Seen this way, the behavior becomes less about impulse and more about history carried gently forward. Beneath the visible movement of a dog's body, something quieter is always at work, the steady internal rhythm, a balance between calm and alertness. This balance is governed not by thought, but by the nervous system, constantly adjusting to the emotional tone of the environment. When a dog begins to follow or chase a female dog, the body may appear animated, focused, even intent. But internally, this motion is often an attempt to regulate sensation rather than escalate it. A dog's nervous system is designed to respond to change. Movement in another dog alters the emotional landscape. Distance shifts, attention sharpens. The body responds not with logic, but with readiness. In dogs who are emotionally well-regulated, arousal rises gently and falls just as smoothly. Interest is present but flexible. The body can pause, observe, let the moment pass without tension. In others, arousal lingers longer, not because something is wrong, but because the nervous system has learned to stay engaged. Stillness feels incomplete. Motion feels stabilizing. Following becomes a way to stay synchronized with the environment. This is not restlessness. It is regulation through engagement. The dog's senses heighten, not aggressively, but attentively. Ears track. Eyes soften yet stay locked. The body aligns itself with the direction of the other dog, as if maintaining an invisible thread of awareness. The movement keeps the system organized. It prevents emotional disconnection. Importantly, this state is not chaotic. It is purposeful common motion. From the outside, the chase may seem driven by instinct alone. From the inside, it often feels like balance being maintained. The dog is not overwhelmed. It is managing stimulation in the most familiar way it knows. This explains why interruption does not always dissolve the urge. The behavior is not only about the other dog. It is about the internal state that movement sustains. When motion stops abruptly, some dogs do not relax. They become unsettled. The nervous system has lost its regulating activity. The body remains alert, waiting for resolution that never arrives. Seen through this lens, chasing becomes less about pursuit and more about alignment. The dog is keeping emotional pace with the world around it. Nothing here is excessive. Nothing is broken. The nervous system is simply doing what it learned to do, using motion to stay emotionally coherent. And until the system learns that stillness can also be safe, movement will continue to feel like the most natural language of connection. At some point, movement alone stops resolving the inner tension, not because the desire fades, but because the environment responds, sometimes subtly, sometimes decisively. Distance increases. Access closes. The other dog turns away, or the moment simply passes. This is where adaptation begins. Dogs are exceptionally sensitive to feedback, not verbal correction, but emotional consequence. When a signal is repeatedly unanswered, the nervous system does not protest. It recalibrates. The chase slows. The distance grows. The body learns that persistence does not always bring closeness. Over time, many dogs begin to soften the signal they send outward, not because the feeling disappears, but because expressing it fully no longer seems effective. The body remembers what worked before and what did not. This reduction is quiet, almost invisible. The dog may still follow, but at a greater distance. The pace becomes measured. The posture lowers. Eye contact shortens. The emotional volume turns down, not off. What looks like restraint is often adaptation. Inside, the nervous system is learning efficiency. It conserves energy. It minimizes exposure. It avoids unnecessary arousal. The dog is not suppressing desire. It is regulating expectation. This process mirrors a deeper emotional intelligence. Dogs do not dwell on rejection. They do not analyze it. They simply adjust their presence to match the environment's tolerance. In this way, silence becomes safer than insistence. For some dogs, this adaptation brings calm. For others, it creates a quiet internal conflict. The desire to connect remains, but the expression becomes muted. The body holds the impulse instead of releasing it. This is not frustration in the human sense. It is containment. A contained signal is still a signal, but one that asks less of the world. From the outside, such dogs may appear composed, even indifferent, but composure does not mean absence. It means the emotional current has moved inward. The dog has learned that connection does not always respond to intensity. Sometimes it responds to quiet presence. Sometimes it does not respond at all. And so the dog waits, not passively, not hopelessly, but attentively. The nervous system remains alert, calibrated, and ready, yet no longer insists on motion as its primary voice. The body learns to hold the feeling, without needing to chase it into the open. This is the moment when behavior becomes subtle enough to be overlooked, but it is also the moment when the dog's emotional life becomes most complex. There is a moment when nothing about the dog's behavior changes, yet everything about its meaning does. The dog is no longer chasing, not retreating either, simply present. It stands at a distance that feels intentional, close enough to remain aware, far enough to remain safe. The body is still. The eyes follow without insisting. The tail rests, neither tense nor loose. This is usually when the observer finally notices, not because the dog does something new, but because the dog stops doing what once drew attention. The absence of urgency creates space, and in that space, meaning appears. The observer may realize that the dog has been paying attention all along, that what once looked like instinctive pursuit was, in fact, relational awareness, that the dog was not driven by impulse alone, but by attunement, reading movement, energy, availability. The shift is subtle. It does not announce itself. It arrives as a quiet recognition. The dog is not distracted. It is choosing restraint. This realization changes the emotional frame. The behavior is no longer seen as something to interrupt or manage. It becomes something to witness. From this perspective, the dog's stillness carries weight. The lowered posture reads as respect rather than submission. The reduced movement looks less like disinterest and more like emotional calibration. The observer begins to sense that the dog is regulating itself, not because it was forced to, but because it learned how. This awareness often comes late, after the visible behavior fades, after the chase becomes memory, after the emotional signal becomes quiet enough to blend into the background. But once seen, it cannot be unseen. The observer may notice how the dog continues to orient toward the other presence without crossing invisible boundaries, how the eyes track without fixation, how the body remains ready without pressing forward. There is patience here, not passive patience, but relational patience, the kind that stays emotionally engaged while honoring distance. In this moment, the dog is no longer defined by what it wants. It is defined by how it holds that wanting. This is where meaning shifts from action to presence. The dog is no longer expressing desire outwardly. It is containing it inwardly. And that containment reflects a form of emotional maturity rarely acknowledged in animals. The observer may feel a quiet humility, a recognition that the dog has been navigating complexity without language, without explanation, guided only by nervous system learning and emotional feedback. The chase did not disappear, it transformed. And the dog, still and attentive, carries that transformation silently, waiting not for permission, but for understanding. What follows a moment of recognition is not correction. It is reattunement. Nothing is instructed. Nothing is demanded. The environment does not tighten around the dog. Instead, something softens. The emotional field shifts, not because behavior is managed, but because it is finally understood. The dog senses this immediately. Dogs are exquisitely responsive to emotional atmosphere, not to words, but to tone, not to intention, but to presence. When tension leaves the observer's body, the dog's nervous system registers it as safety. This is where healing begins, not as a process, but as a condition. The dog does not need guidance to change what it is already regulating. What it needs is emotional permission to remain as it is, to hold desire without being judged for it, to stay attentive without being seen as problematic. In this softened space, the dog's body settles further. Breathing slows. Micro movements reduce. The eyes remain aware, but no longer search for cues of interruption. Reattunement is not about increasing closeness. It is about restoring emotional accuracy. The observer no longer watches a dog for signs of escalation. Instead, they witness the dog's capacity to self-regulate. The dog, in turn, senses that it is no longer being evaluated. This mutual easing creates a quiet loop of trust. The dog does not approach, but it does not withdraw either. It remains exactly where it is, balanced between interest and restraint. This position is not accidental. It is learned. It reflects a nervous system that has adapted to complexity without shutting down. There is dignity here. Not obedience, not submission. Dignity. The dog is allowed to feel without being required to act. Allowed to notice without being required to respond. Allowed to want without being required to suppress. This is often misunderstood as neutrality, but it is not neutral at all. It is emotional safety. In this state, the dog is no longer rehearsing old patterns. It is resting inside a new one where presence is enough and silence is not absence. Reattunement does not erase instinct. It gives instinct somewhere to settle. The observer may notice how little effort this requires. No intervention. No correction, just a steady emotional presence that does not tighten when desire appears. The dog remains attentive, calm, whole, not because something was fixed, but because something was finally aligned. This is a quiet power of being seen without being controlled. In the end, the dog is still waiting, not because it has been told to, not because it expects a reward, but because waiting has become a language it understands. Waiting for this dog is not emptiness. It is presence stretched across time. The body remains still, but the inner world is active. Sensory awareness continues. Sounds passing through the air, subtle movements at the edge of vision, shifts in scent and light. The dog is not disengaged from life. It is deeply inside it. What waiting teaches the observer is subtle and often uncomfortable. That loyalty does not always announce itself. That attachment does not always cling. That love, in dogs, can exist without performance. The dog has learned that not every feeling must become motion. That desire can be held without collapsing into urgency. This is not suppression. It is emotional maturity shaped by experience. Many dogs never reach this state. They are either pulled forward by instinct or shut down by restraint. This dog stands in between, balanced, attentive, regulated. Waiting reveals the dog's trust in continuity, trust that the world will move again, trust that nothing essential is being lost, trust that presence is not measured by proximity. The observer may realize something quietly profound. The dog has not been waiting for something. It has been waiting with something, with the environment, with the moment, with the relationship as it exists, not as it demands to be. This reframes the entire behavior. What once looked like fixation now appears as patience. What looked like longing now reads as steadiness. What felt uncomfortable now feels intentional. The dog has learned how to stay emotionally intact in situations that stir instinct. This is not accidental. It is a result of adaptation, repetition, and safety over time. And in this waiting, there is wisdom, not the kind that teaches, the kind that mirrors. The dog shows that silence is not disconnection, that stillness can be an active choice, that loyalty does not need constant expression to be real. When the moment eventually passes, the dog will move, calmly, fully, without residue. Nothing will linger unresolved inside its body, because it did not fight itself. This is what the dog teaches by waiting, that being present does not require control, that desire does not require urgency, that connection does not require noise. And perhaps the most important lesson of all, that being seen, without being corrected, allows a nervous system to rest. The dog remains where it is, whole, attentive, at peace.